don't want to see Donald Trump go to prison, or Don Jr., or Eric, or Ivanka, or Jared, or any of them, simply because I politically disagree with virtually everything that they stand for. I want them to go to prison for the crimes that they committed. And in this specific case, Attorney General Tish James has all the evidence. She has what's called documentary evidence. She has the goods.
Wow. Hi again, everyone. It's 5 o'clock in New York. She has the goods. Not exactly the words you want to hear if your last name is Trump. Because what the former fixer to the former president, Donald Trump, is talking about there is a significant update in the New York Attorney General's civil investigation into the ex-president's business dealings. In a statement released late Tuesday, Attorney General Letitia James says she has, quote, significant evidence that suggests Donald J. Trump and the Trump org falsely and fraudulently valued multiple assets and misrepresented those values to financial institutions for economic benefit. She says she is seeking legal action to compel Donald Trump Jr., and Ivanka Trump to provide sworn testimony. James's statement was released alongside a massive court filing detailing specific examples of the ex-president and his company lying about the value of its assets. Findings that are very much in line with the Donald Trump we've all come to not be surprised by now for decades. As the New York Times reports, quote, Mr. Trump's penchant for hyperbole has defined every stage of his career, from real estate mogul to reality television impresario to U.S. president. And when it comes to business, Trump has conceded making the occasional exaggeration, once remarking that everyone inflates the worth of their assets, but that he did not do so beyond reason. But the question of whether such misstatements were simply showmanship or a pattern of fraud is now at the heart of the New York Attorney General's civil inquiry into the former president and his family business. James's filing was in response to last month's attempt by the ex-president to shut down her investigation and quash the subpoenas served to him and his kids. The Trump org responded yesterday by calling James's probe politically motivated and saying, quote, her allegations are baseless and will be vigorously defended. The AG's office said it has not yet reached a final decision regarding whether this evidence merits legal action. But even so, it is not the only state investigation examining the ex-president's actions that is picking up steam this week. From the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, quote, Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis is requesting a special grand jury to aid in her investigation of former President Donald Trump and his efforts to overturn Georgia's 2020 election results. Willis, who is looking into whether Trump committed a crime when he pressured Georgia's Secretary of State to find him 11,780 votes, cited the need to subpoena witnesses in her request, an authority a special grand jury would have. Intensifying investigations of the ex-president's conduct is where we start this hour with some of our most favorite reporters and friends. New York Times investigative reporter Suzanne Craig is here. She has covered the finances and taxes of Donald Trump and the Trump family since 2015, winning awards along the way. Also joining us, Harry Litman, former Deputy Assistant Attorney General and former U.S. Attorney, and Donnie Deutsch is here, host of the On Brand podcast. I want to start with you, Harry Litman, and let's take the two investigations separately. First, tell me sort of give me a viewer's guide, a non-lawyer viewer's guide to what Attorney General Tish James is saying in these filings.
Sure, because it isn't all that lawyerly, Nicole. Really, all she's saying is we have a right to depose Trump and his children. And there's not a big showing you have to make for that. So there's a little PR component. She's saying since the Republicans and the Trumps have said this is in bad faith, let me tell you a few things that we have. And what they have are some really, really brazen lies. An exaggeration would not, or hyperbole would be, nowhere near what we're talking about. Apartments that he said are 3 times as big as they really are. Non-existent mansions, all kinds of grotesque disparities between valuations for one purpose and for another that defraud either banks or insurance companies. So she's got a really strong 12 instances, letter and verse, flat out brazen lies that she's saying for that reason, I get a right to depose the higher-ups because so far the higher-ups haven't cooperated.
Donnie, some of what we know in terms of the evidence James has is from your friend Michael Cohen. Here he is on CNN yesterday.
So I have provided documentary evidence going back to the House Oversight Committee, to the Attorney General's office, as well as the District Attorney's office. So I know specifically the documents that they have. On top of that, I'm not the only one. There are about close to a dozen corroborating individuals, which is so important to me, considering Donald Trump labeled me as a convicted liar, simply so that he could denigrate me and he could ruin my credibility in the event that this case goes further and he ultimately has to sit for trial.
Donnie, do you know who the dozen corroborating individuals are? And does Michael Cohen?
Michael Cohen would know who they are. I wouldn't be surprised if one of them is not the COO. I can't. His name escapes me right now. We know that Weisselberg is not. He's standing trial coming up for tax fraud. I find the whole premise of the defense, the Trump defense, that people are given to hyperbole. You can't, when you speak to the IRS, you can't speak to legal folks, say, oh, I was just exaggerating, I mean, this Trump Tower apartment that I said is worth $300 million, where it's really worth $25 to $30 million, and I got a loan based on that as an asset, and there are 5 and 10 and 20 other examples like that. Like, oops, that's just hyperbole. That's if you're talking to Forbes and trying to get on the Forbes 400 list, not for bank statements, not for loan statements, not for insurance statements. So there is what we do know, and James knows this, and the New York District Attorney's Office knows this, is what Donald Trump has done and his children have done, anybody else would go to jail for. I could take 1,000 cases, and Harry would be able to talk this better than me. So the question is, obviously, in the Attorney General's case, it's a civil case. She could take assets away from him, and we still haven't heard from Brett, what was Cy Vance's office, which is now Brett's office.
So, Suzanne, let me read this apartment part from the filing, which Donnie and Harry both alluded to. This was released this week. With respect to Trump's triplex apartment in Trump Tower, OAG has discovered that the valuations of this asset, as incorporated into the statements of financial condition since at least 2012, were based on the assertion that the triplex apartment was 30,000 square feet in size. The actual size of Trump's triplex apartment was only 10,996 square feet. Because these valuations were performed by multiplying the number of square feet times a price per square foot, the reduction in the apartment square footage in the valuation from 30,000 to 10,996 indicates that the valuations of Trump's triplex in the years 2015 and 16 were overstated by a factor of 3. As Weisselberg conceded in his testimony. Weisselberg admitted that this amounted to an overstatement of, quote, give or take $200 million. As Donnie's saying, Suzanne, these are exaggerations, lies that would land most of the rest of us in jail. What is the status right now based on what is public facing in this investigation?
Well, that exaggeration in itself necessarily wouldn't land you in jail. It's sort of what you do with it after you make the exaggeration. You can have the biggest, the best building. It can be worth $400 million. Where you get into trouble is where you submit false information to financial institutions, banks, insurance companies, and then you get a loan off of it. And that's potentially where you can get into hot water. What's interesting about what happened this week, when I looked at all the documents, was a very, very common defense in this sort of situation is, well, I relied on the advice of professionals. I have accountants, I have lawyers. And what the Attorney General in New York is saying is that the Trump family, and that's Donald Trump and his children, were much more involved in these inflating these values than we previously known, and that they overstated how much they relied on experts. Both can be true. The Trump family could have been very involved, and they could have had experts. But where the Attorney General is going with this and making a case is saying that the Trump family was just much more involved than we thought, and was sending documents over and putting stuff in front of bankers to a degree that that could get them in trouble, and that's where the Attorney General's heading on that.
And Suzanne, potentially consistent with that, the president's son, Eric Trump, invoked his Fifth Amendment right when he was brought in to testify. Is there any sense of what the line of questions were when he did that?
I think that they were asked about all of these valuations. Eric Trump in particular is very involved in Seven Springs, one of the properties that they're looking at in terms of the valuations that were placed on it. That was definitely among the questions. But there, that was the range would have been all the properties that he touched, which is most of them. And taking the Fifth Amendment in a civil case can be used against you. I sense that's why, or I think the Attorney General wants to interview all the Trumps, but once they are in front of her and they take the Fifth, it could be used against them in a civil case. So that's something that's got to be on the Attorney General's mind and her investigators.
Susan, a lot of what we knew prior to these investigations, starting to have any sort of public-facing tidbits or tea leaves, was based on your reporting, which was based on documents, but sort of a limited view, if you will, of what happened in terms of how Trump paid taxes and what he claimed and what he valued. And a lot of what the investigators now have as a result of the Supreme Court decision to turn over and to have access to some of the accountants and some of the banks. What are you waiting to see based on all that you knew going into this and all that they have in addition to what you were able to see and understand?
Well, I think what's powerful about, when we did a lot of this work in 2018 in particular, to have his taxes is one thing. We had 20 years of corporate and personal tax information for stories that we did in 2020. But what is so powerful is when you have, and we had the advantage of this in 2018 in the story that we did on Fred Trump's wealth, Donald Trump's father, is just putting all these pieces together and seeing not just the taxes, but the bank statements. I was looking through the filings from the Attorney General the other night, and they've got so much information from the accounting firm. There's information from banks. There's depositions. When you put all this together, it's very powerful, and I think we're going to see both something coming out of the Attorney General, and then there's a separate criminal case going on in Manhattan where they also just have reams of documents. And it's how they all come together and how they speak to each other once you have them all and you're able to see, okay, well, here's